Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Hi, welcome back to another episode. Well, a few months ago in his State of the Union address, President Biden talked about that one of the things he wanted to do is to take on junk fees. And I wrote about this in one of my columns. I actually counted 313 words that he devoted to this. And one of my normal columns is 600 words. So I couldn't go through everything. But his concern, and I think somewhat unusual to devote to a State of the Union address in being this granular, maybe not, was doing something about all the hidden fees that are involved in so many of the services we purchase. So I want to talk about that, and then I want to talk about the emotional component of those fees. So surprise, it's financial therapy, and let's talk about the financial part of this right now. So hidden fees, hidden terms, is something that's been around for a long, long time. I mean, it's the old adage of read the fine print, right? That's pretty timeless advice. In doing research for this, I came across a quote by Pete Seeger. He was an American folk singer back in the 40s, I believe. And he said, "Do you know the difference between education and experience? Education is what you get when you read the fine print. Experience is what you get when you don't." So I kind of thought that might sum up a little bit of this, but not all of it. So the first thought that I've had is, well, why don't the sellers of services just transparently list one price that includes all fees? Wouldn't that be easy? Wouldn't that be easier to compare? And I think from a regulatory standpoint, yes. If absolutely all the fees were in the price, then we would have apples to apples on which to compare. So why isn't that? Well, first of all, it's not regulated or a law in most cases. And the motivation for not listing an all-inclusive price is mostly psychological. Imagine that. A seller often wants to attract customers by appearing to offer the lowest price, even when what they're charging is the same or maybe even higher than their competitors. I mean, kind of gives you an advantage if you charge $670 for all the services that your competitor charges $600 for. But if you could advertise your fee at $450, wow, that is pretty attractive. But there's a psychological term for what they're doing here, and it's called anchoring. It's a cognitive bias. We've talked about cognitive biases before. It's called anchoring. So let's go back to the numbers I've just threw out. Let's say that one airline offers a fare at $600 and another one on the same route, same time, offers a fare of $450. Well, our brains automatically anchor on the $600 fare, and we assume that the $450 fare is the better buy. So what we consumers fail to realize is if we don't make the shift from our fast thinking limbic brain, the emotional brain that looks at that, boom, makes a decision, I'll go for the cheaper price, and doesn't slow down and use the cognitive brain, which is slower, we can miss the fact that the $600 fare includes all the services and additional fees, with the $450 fare at the cheaper cost, including or doesn't include all of those fees. So if we slow down and take the time to read the details of the $450 fare, we find out that there's an early boarding fee of $50. Reserving a specific seat is $60. A window or aisle seat is another $30. A checked bag is $50. A carry-on bag is $30. Well, just there's a total of $220 of extra add-ons, which makes the $450 fare actually $670, which is $70 more than the what seemed to be expensive all-inclusive $600 fare. So that's why slowing down can be so important, getting into our cerebral cortex, that thinking frontal lobe of our brain. Well, is this practice inherently wrong? And there's some that would kind of lead the idea that there is. There was a New York Times article I wrote on sneaky fees that kind of left you with the idea that this practice is inherently wrong. Well, I suppose in some cases when it's fraudulent, it definitely could be wrong. But in most cases, it's completely legal. Proponents of breaking down a price into segments would argue that this gives the consumer the opportunity to only pay for the services they want. For example, perhaps none of these add-ons are important to a traveler, except maybe a carry-on. So the carry-on's $30, then their fare is $480. That's considerably less, 20% less than the all-inclusive $600 fare. So that seems to actually give consumers more choice. Seems to be a good thing. So I think what we're talking about here isn't whether offering consumers choice is a good thing or not. I think what we're talking about is transparency. And I recently had a podcast covering honesty and transparency. So, I mean, really, who can argue that requiring sellers of services be held to a standard of transparency? I mean, in and of itself, that seems pretty good. The problem is when we require it. It is just fraught with minefields in attempting to enforce something like that. One thing I think about right now is when I eat out and I get my final bill, at least at my favorite restaurant in Rapid City, I now notice a 3.5% fee that originated in the pandemic. And I'm noticing this on more and more restaurants that I might go to in other cities. Now, this fee is in addition to any tip, and it can be creatively called a number of different things: service fee, a health fee, an inflation adjustment fee, all sorts of different things. And it can typically ranges between 3 and 5%. Now, that I find in many cases I'm not informed of this fee prior to ordering. Now, certainly maybe that was more problem in the past. Maybe it's becoming more normal to inform the customer of this fee. I don't eat out much. I hope that changes, but in many cases, I only was informed of this fee when I received the check. Now, I looked at it, and there's some annoyance. The fee is relatively small, but another part of me says that's not the point. I also have wondered why the owner just doesn't raise prices to cover the costs of wages, or the costs of providing benefits, or the cost of food going up. And I think it's obvious that a $30 entree plus a 3.5% hidden fee is cheaper to the brain than a $31 entree with no fee, even though they're the same cost. And for those of you that are using a calculator right now, yes, it's $31.05, but I rounded down. A $200 hotel room with no resort fee is more expensive to the brain than a $160 hotel room with a hidden $50 resort fee. A $50 daily all-inclusive car rental fare is more expensive than a $40 daily rate with a hidden airport tax of $10 and taxes of $8. We can go on and on and on. I mean, this is very true in the financial services business, right? There can be all sorts of hidden fees, especially with annuities. Usually, to figure out the full cost of an annuity, it's not unusual that there's 3 different fees that you've got to comb through the small print to find out. So President Biden pledges to eliminate these hidden fees with his Junk Fee Prevention Act. Well, that sounds pretty good. However, if you read the small print of Biden's initiative to eliminate junk fees, it covers only 4 types of fees: online concert and sports fees, airline fees for families to sit together, early termination fees for TV, phone, and internet services, and undisclosed resort or destination fees at hotels. And I think the operative word here is undisclosed, right? That's it. That's what the Junk Fee Prevention Act covers. Well, 4 out of how many? Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of types of hidden fees, right? The president stated that Americans are tired of being played for suckers and getting stiffed. So, writing a bill that encompasses the enormity of mandating transparency of all charges, wow, I think that's next to impossible. So, I think the takeaway is that the bottom line is that junk fees are going to be with us for a long, long time. And as with most financial purchases, the burden is on the consumer to ask questions and get all the facts before agreeing to the service, or the goods. So a good way, and this is true, right? This is true in any service. We talked recently about health services and how we've got to ask questions, talk about hidden fees. Have you ever gotten a bill for health services when you've had an operation or hospital stay, right? We don't pay much attention to that because in a lot of cases, insurance covers most, if not all. But imagine the enormity of understanding all of the fees for a medical operation if there is no insurance. So, a good way to end being played for a sucker is learning to ask questions when we purchase a service. And just when I do interviews with reporters, you almost always end with, what would you like to say that I haven't addressed? Just kind of a general catch-all. And this is kind of the same of asking somebody, what other fees or charges are there that I need to know about? What other fees or charges are there involved with this service, involved with this purchase that I need to know about? So, to some degree, I think that's pretty easy. I think that's a pretty good solution, right? Well, that's really easy to say. It's really easy to write in a column. Here's how to fix it. But like so many things, the implementation of that can be anything but easy. The first thing is that our brains just don't automatically adapt to new habits overnight. I mean, if it was just that easy, if we're overspending, it's like, okay, we'll just stop overspending. Okay, got it. It doesn't work that way. So if we can form that habit, that's great. But it's not going to happen automatically overnight, and it may not even happen automatically after months or even years. So I thought it'd be good to address, what can we do when we're given a bill that has additional charges and fees that we weren't expecting or that are incorrect? And what's the emotional component of this that might keep us from doing that? Well, obviously, the first and most important thing we got to do is review any bill before paying it. Oh, okay, that's simple. Well, that in itself can be very difficult. Reviewing a bill in and of itself can be fraught with money scripts and emotions. How can that be, Rick? Look at the bill, you go through it. I mean, pretty mechanical, robotic, isn't it? Well, no, just imagine yourself at dinner. And let's say you're paying. You wouldn't have to be paying, but let's say you are. And the conversation is engaging and it's lively, and the last thing you want is to break this flow. There is a fear here of breaking the flow when the waiter lays down the bill. Now, of course, you can wait. You can wait to review it. That's perfectly okay. But sometimes it's just easier in that moment. All these decisions are made in a nanosecond. Easier and less painful just to pull out the credit card, give it to the server as they're putting the bill down without a glance at the bill and trust that everything's accurate. Nobody notices it. The conversation continues. Unless, of course, you get into the dynamic of who's paying for the bill. But that's not my point here. So that's a way to go. Now, I said less painful. What can be painful about taking the checkup and reviewing it line by line? Well, typically underneath our emotional behaviors. Especially in this case when they're avoidant, can be an emotion. In IFS terms, can be in exile. Now, if we could trust, in every case, this would be great. And the whole problem here is we can't trust. My experience is that there's an adjustment needed in 1 out of every 3 restaurant bills. And that's not counting discovering any hidden service fees. I know there's a restaurant that I go to that has a wonderful happy hour that ends at 6 p.m. and it's like a 2-for-1. And I cannot tell you how many times that's left off the bill. Probably more than 1 out of 3. So just an example of where some presence is needed. But what would stop me from reviewing the check? Well, there could be a money script that scrutinizing the bill would be offensive to the server. An assumption that they're not trustworthy, assumption that they made a mistake. Are there people really that would have that money script? Oh yeah, totally. Some of you listening to this right now are going, oh, absolutely, I just wouldn't want that server to be offended that I stopped it and went through it. Another money script could be that stopping, going through the bill line by line would give the perception to your guests that you're overly focused on money rather than the experience. A projection that you could be a penny pincher, in some way greedy. Or maybe that you have to review the bill line by line because you're so strapped that you can barely afford it. And certainly don't want any errors to be made to where you'd be paying more. Now, the possibilities in the money scripts here are endless, as well as the emotions. But all of this is present. So what else could those at the table be thinking? Well, some may not even notice at all, right? Others could be looking at you going through this bill, and they could have a real positive regard for the attention that you're giving to the detail, especially if you're splitting the check. Have you ever been at a table where the bill comes and somebody just looks around and says, okay, should we split it? And, oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's great. Well, there's those that are completely okay with that. They could care less if they just ordered a Coke and everybody else had a complete meal. And there's others that are extremely troubled by that. I remember when I was in that situation once, and I had been very judicious in keeping my costs low, thinking that we would split the bill equally, proportionally, not equally. Anyway, who's paying and how we're doing the bill is a big deal. Maybe I should do a whole podcast on that. So the list is endless here. So when you do review the bill and you find an error, then what? Well, logically, you could bring the error to the attention of the server. That is, if you can get the server's attention. Okay, that was a side note. However, sometimes even the prospect of a conflict. If I review this bill, I find an error, I think I'll let it slide. Because we could have a conflict. It's not that much. It just isn't worth it to draw the attention to this. I'll just pay the disagreeable charges. There's all sorts of money scripts and emotions that are at work there. Caretaking of the server, not wanting to be judged, again, by my guests. So if you do bring up the disputed charges, the server could agree and make the adjustment. Or maybe need to go check with the supervisor. And this takes additional time and focus away from your guests or on this issue. And then here comes the server with the supervisor in tow. And now a more lengthy discussion may ensue to discuss the charges or discuss the hidden fees and to maybe come up with something that is a negotiated settlement. So all sorts of possibilities here. And I've just covered the build a restaurant. These same dynamics are involved in receiving the bill for a car rental, a hotel, a ticket purchase without taking a minute and reviewing the bill. You know, have you ever been in a hurry at a hotel, in a hurry dropping off a car, right? If we don't review it, we don't know what we've just agreed to. And if there's an erroneous charge, do we even have the time to negotiate it and go through everything needed to make the bill right? Again, one of the best ways to reduce pressure in these situations is by being to think ahead, to be preemptive, maybe with a hotel that's checking the night before on all the charges. And it doesn't mean that a person can't become present even after the fact. Because with all credit cards, you can dispute charges, especially if you've called the establishment and tried to work out something. There's all sorts of ways you can do this. It could possibly take more time and effort doing it after the fact, but sometimes doing it after the fact is not possible. So here's the bottom line. Taking care of ourselves financially in these cases is the art of being present, the art of being self-led in an IFS lens, being aware of our money scripts, being aware of all the emotions that surround them, and then at some point in time asking them to stand aside while you focus on the reality of the bill in front of you, of creating that space so you can be fully focused on the charges that you're agreeing to pay. So that's kind of the bottom line of how complicated this can be when we are faced with these hidden fees and hidden charges. The bottom line is to be aware, to be present, to make decisions that are clean and in your best interest. And that could even be paying the hidden fee. Because you can be in a place of calm and focus and just say, considering everything, I'm okay with paying that hidden fee. So that's what I have for today. I appreciate all of the feedback that I get on the podcast. Somebody recently asked me when I'm going to stop doing these, and I guess I'm going to stop when I run out of material or they're not fun anymore. So thanks again for your interest, and I'll talk with you next week. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.